One of the blessings and curses of 2020 has been the shift away from movie theaters as the primary mode for seeing first-run motion pictures. As the AMCs and the Regals lumber about and die in a cloud of COVID-19 asteroid dust, streaming services have crawled out of the second-status entertainment muck and begun to sprout legs. Such is the case with HBO Max, whose forthcoming subscriber-grabbing attractions of Wonder Woman 1984 and the long fantasized about Justice League Snyder Cut are still on fans' wish lists at the moment. But a Warner Brothers movie did debut there last week that in all likelihood would have made it into the multiplex in the alternate version of this year in which we'd all rather be living. Having seen Ben Falcone's Superintelligence, however, I can say that paying as little money as possible to watch the latest Melissa McCarthy vehicle is the right way to go. Hell, the psychic price has already landed me in debtor's prison. McCarthy stars as Carol, an aimless Seattle resident who is identified by a newly self-aware AI as the most average person on planet Earth. The self-described superintelligence, who manifests as a 3D rendering of a frenetic blue globe on computer screens and as the voice of James Corden in Carol's ear, uses Carol as a baseline to determine whether or not mankind is worth saving. It's like a semi-benevolent Skynet from The Terminator or John Glover's creepy alien ambassador from the new Twilight Zone episode A Small Talent for War. Superintelligence, you see, is confused by the human race, unsure as to whether or not it should use the hooks it has into almost literally every aspect of our day-to-day lives to help us, enslave us, or destroy us. In theory, it could solve world hunger and poverty, outfit everyone with a sweet car, nice house, and unlimited food, and generally take away the material reasons for struggle. It could also turn us into mindless automatons whom it keeps around as pets, and I guess to manually keep its physical needs running in some way. Actually, I don't really get this middle option at all. It sounds more like screenwriter Steve Mallory just wanted an excuse to stick with the rule of threes. Superintelligence could also wipe us out completely, leaving the Earth a smoking, fetid husk over which it would rain, but because this is a Melissa McCarthy comedy presided over by the same director-husband who gave us Tammy, The Boss, and Life of the Party, we know that Carol won't be leading any John Connor-style revolts against Cordenbot 5000. Though there is a devilishly fun couple of minutes during the climax when we glimpse the movie this could have been, had it been an actual movie, when Superintelligence gives up on Carol and decides to trigger Armageddon. By this time, though, I'd long since given up on Carol and on Superintelligence, the film as well as the character. Falcone and Mallory have a terrific premise and a leading lady whom I greatly admire. I've been a fan of McCarthy's since the Gilmore Girls days, but just about every movie I've watched of hers in the ensuing 20 years has been a waste of her considerable talents. On that TV show, she played the kind of ditzy best friend/chef to Lauren Graham's main character. Theirs was a warm, funny, and often very moving non-familial sisterhood that didn't rely on Melissa McCarthy making a fool out of herself, exploiting the fact that she doesn't, as the kids say, conform to societal beauty standards. When I first heard that she was set to jump into the movies, I was ecstatic. When I started watching those movies, I was crestfallen. Melissa McCarthy is not Chris Farley, but she's taken up the mantle of the well-meaning, overweight klutz who can't help but getting into trouble. Because, fat people are just designed to roll into things, knock over furniture, fall off cliffs, etc. To make matters worse, McCarthy seems drawn to roles that require her to bury her quite radiant beauty under layers of metaphysical and prosthetic filth. Whether it's her pasty bulldog in Bridesmaids, who, along with the rest of her debased castmates, winds up spewing shit in public, her unwashed belligerent cop in The Heat, or the situational comedy Spy, in which the gag from the movie poster onward was the fact that her rotund figure has no place in the sleek and sexy spy thriller genre. There's an ugliness to a lot of her filmography that I just can't shake. Of course, an enlightened take on McCarthy's filmography might sound like, hey, she's making untold millions of dollars and bringing laughs to people all over the world. She's no victim. I can't argue with the first or third points, but I'm going to need some hard data on claim number 2. I do think it's great that McCarthy has worked to create a brand and platform for herself, but there's little in her output that suggests audiences can appreciate her more than as a cuddly, dumb mascot. Perhaps it's because the movies in which she does broaden her range, such as The Kitchen, Can You Ever Forgive Me, or the much-maligned but loved by me Ghostbusters 2016, tend to underperform at the box office. If I were a betting man, I'd say that when McCarthy, and to an extent Falcone, look at a slate of offers, choosing the Fatty Falls Down movies is a no-brainer from an economic standpoint. All other considerations cascade from there. Which brings us to one of the earliest scenes in Superintelligence, in which McCarthy interviews for a high-paid consulting job at an internet startup. The office is one of those open-concept, no-cubicle dealies, and the chair in which she's asked to sit is actually an oversized beanbag, which she promptly falls into and out of and can never quite get comfortable in because, gravity plus mass equals difficulty getting up, and laughs. It turns out Carol was in on the ground floor of Yahoo back in the day and has spent several years doing philanthropy work while trying to figure out something else to do with her life. Yeah, you caught that too, huh? The so-called most average person on Earth helped kickstart a former leading world internet company and was so handsomely compensated that she's not had to work for, if I had to guess, in at least a decade. One might breeze right past this fact had the filmmakers not unintentionally underscored its offensive ridiculousness a few scenes later when Superintelligence, after having gifted Carol $10 million and a brand new Tesla, makes an appointment for her at a high-end fashion boutique where we are treated to a clothing montage. Thank God these didn't die with Robin Williams, huh? After looking at the price tag of one particularly gaudy ensemble in the changing room, Carol whines about how that money could be used to help the disadvantaged, and that if she had the power, she would ensure that everyone had a living wage, fair working conditions, and on and on and on. Cut to her arriving at a high-end grocery store wearing one of those overpriced outfits she just decried. When I pointed out the gross hypocrisy of this sequence of events to my wife, she said that at least the money had gone to a small business and not some big corporation. Which is technically true. However, Carol could just as easily have popped down to Walmart, pulled a comparable dress off the rack for $50, and donated the multi-$1,000 difference to any number of charities. But who has time for that when it's time for love? Yes, despite what you may have thought from the premise I described, Superintelligence isn't actually a technological morality movie or even an end-of-the-world movie. It's a dopey rom-com in the aping Apatow mold, in which characters play out tired sitcom plotlines while engaging in even more tired improv banter for which no one on set appears to have had the guts to call cut. Carol used to date George, played by Bobby Cannavale, who delivers the most personality-free performance I've ever seen from him. They broke up when she decided to put career over relationship, and he went on to become a successful creative writing professor who is now 3 days from leaving for a year-long guest course in Ireland. Coincidentally, Superintelligence has said that Carol has 3 days to convince it that mankind is worth saving. Carol doesn't divulge any of this to George, of course, choosing instead to awkwardly suggest that they go out on a date. He politely declines, but only so Falcone and company can pad out the runtime until he relents for a reason? The date happens, and if you've ever seen a movie, you know exactly how things play out from here. For a good long while, Superintelligence drops out of the movie so we can focus on Carol and George's will-they-won't-they pseudo-drama. The movie is roughly an hour and 40 minutes long, and the time devoted to forward momentum on the premise is approximately a quarter of that, maybe less, especially considering Superintelligence never should have needed to enlist a person to help him solve his quandary in the first place. Allow me to explain. When Carol first begins to accept that she's not going crazy, she turns to a bigwig tech genius at Microsoft named Dennis, played by Brian Tyree Henry. Superintelligence manifests in front of Dennis, and soon his entire team, revealing part of his plans and his intentions with Carol. They agree to stay mum for the 3 days it will take to work things out, but Dennis confides in a military contact who sets into motion the film's B-plot, a big scary government response. At Dennis's team meeting, Superintelligence makes a funny yet chilling reference to War Games, the excellent 1982 Matthew Broderick movie about a military computer who becomes self-aware and endangers civilization. That film is all about human connection, regret, and fallible man's faith in artificial intelligence. It also underscores the reasons that people are worth saving and the dimensions that computers, no matter how much code they can process at unfathomable speeds, will likely, hopefully never comprehend. Superintelligence the movie ends with Superintelligence the Superintelligence learning that there are some good people in the world who make decisions outside their own self-interest and who will act bravely on behalf of themselves or others when the moment calls for heroism. It could have learned these lessons by watching 95% of the films and television entertainment, not to mention poems, novels, songs, and video games, produced since the dawn of human communication. It's like the old Dennis Miller bit where he fantasizes about Dorothy smacking the shit out of Glenda the Good Witch when she found out that she had the power to return to Kansas all along. But I'm not exactly sure how it arrived at this conclusion, using Carol as a case study. When the feds realize that their plans to foil Superintelligence have been found out by the omnipotent entity, it begins disaster movie preparations for continuity of government, including escorting important people to underground bunkers while keeping the wider populace in the dark with a global disinformation campaign about cyber blackouts affecting India and China. Carol is given an hour to grab George and get to one of these bunkers. Instead, she decides to help him pack for Ireland and see him off to his airport cab. When Superintelligence asks her about this, she says she would rather George not spend his last moments on Earth terrified. which is understandable if you're discussing nuclear holocaust, but it's entirely possible that George's plane would have been in the air by the time Superintelligence got around to knocking out all flight communications, meaning he'd spend his last few minutes of life plunging to a fiery, or at least watery death, instead of holed up in a secure government bunker with food, sanitation, sleeping quarters, and the woman he loves. Still, this passes for logic to Superintelligence, who, as the movie goes on, seems to share more in common with the real James Corden than, say, with Stephen Hawking. The Supreme Computer beams into the bunker where the feds are planning for the worst and announces that he's ready to usher in a new era of peace, or at least leave us alone. Two problems here. First, and I can almost forgive this one because, as I mentioned earlier, Superintelligence isn't actually a movie. No one in the film seems concerned that the planet is now enthralled to an omniscient and omnipotent cyberbrain. Though we're expected to be disarmed by its sassy British wit, one is left with the sinking notion that mankind was, in a way, enslaved by Superintelligence, at least so far as people are now going to be walking on eggshells so as not to piss off its new benevolent overlord. Second, the bunker scene furthers the movie's confounding contradictions when it comes to so-called wokeness. Assembled around the Strangelove-style war room table are leaders from various nations, and they are, to a person, dressed in what might be considered stereotypical garb. Perhaps this is authentic to the attire worn by elites when they're at work, but it almost feels like an easy shorthand for dimmer audience members who might not understand why someone from the Middle East is wearing a suit instead of one of them funny-looking head thingies. The second issue is that Falcone and Mallory's depiction of the President of the United States plays like a jarring anachronism, or an indication that the movie was left on the shelf for half a decade. But it's worse than that. Jean Smart's portrayal of the grouchy, Hillary-esque female POTUS is nothing more than liberal wish fulfillment, and a scripted temper tantrum left over from the 2016 election. Most films, when they choose to include a stand-in for the president, either fashion a non-entity who resembles a generic POTUS, a caricature of the current White House occupant, or in the case of 1998's Deep Impact, go completely outside the box. Morgan Freeman's Black President presaged America's first black president by a decade, proving that the country was, in fact, ready for a leader of color, at least at the movies. Dennis Haysbert also performed a similar service in 2001 with his portrayal of the president on the TV show 24. Smart's President Monahan is a blatant reference to Hillary Clinton, as if even in the realm of movies the mere fact of a President Donald Trump is too much to accept. Had Mallory and Falcone had any guts or imagination, they might have incorporated a Trumpian figure into their story as a contrast to Carol's innate goodness, and as something that Superintelligence might actually be able to argue is a real reason that mankind isn't worth saving. Outside the obvious snub, the movie's only hint of political awareness comes off as unintentional, and hilarious to anyone paying attention. The filmmakers introduced this Clintonian president at a world leader roundtable in which she is fawningly referred to as Madam President at least 10 times. Further, she is responsible for coordinating a global disinformation campaign that includes planting fake news stories and blacking out power grids to potentially billions of people, keeping the global populace literally in the dark regarding the motives and actions of their elected leaders. It's not a flattering portrait of the filmmaker's side, assuming they have one, especially if it's supposed to contrast the person they've deliberately erased from their version of reality. Maybe it's not fair to dig into the film's politics, since it obviously has one foot planted more firmly in the bland rom-com world than the sci-fi examination of present-day man, but it is fair to point out that the scant politics it does engage in are confused at best. I usually barf whenever people play the wokeness card, but since Mallory and Falcone played it first, I'll ask why they thought it was okay for the global-minded Carol to be, well, a white woman named Carol living in Seattle instead of, say, a Bangladeshi dressmaker with 2 kids. Wouldn't that be closer to an average human being than a member of the world's top 0.01%? Of course, that would knock McCarthy off the virtual marquee, but she and Falcone might have produced the film together, casting an undiscovered comic talent and really saying something with their stupid little movie. As much as I squirm when people raise these issues in the context of race or gender-bending classic movies, superheroes, and the like, the conspicuous virtue signaling here forces me to call into question the virtues of those doing the signaling. As it stands, this is not what the kids call a good look. For the record, I don't think the people behind Superintelligence are bad. I just wish their judgment had been a bit more super. So, yes, if you're an HBO Max subscriber, Warner Brothers have saved you a trip to the theater. If you're not, well, chances are this isn't going to convince you to sign up. As the weeks and months wear on and multiplexes become less and less viable, I predict studios will grow proportionally more risk-averse to greenlighting ill-conceived, middle-of-the-road comedies like this. Pandemic or not, there's a pretty good chance that the second weekend of a Superintelligence theatrical run would have seen hundreds of depressingly empty auditoriums anyway.